I'm Louis Wang. I'm a PhD candidate from Department of Urban and Regional Planning at University of Florida. So I will moderate this session, and thank you so much for joining us. So first of all, please allow me to introduce our presentations. The first presenter is Hamert Lehman, a postdoctoral fellow from Leeds Makikan, University of Japan. He will talk about the sustainable geodesign of Alexandria downtown in the framework of National Sustainable Development Strategy, Egypt version 2030. The second presenter is Jihan Tao, a PhD student from Texas A&M University. He will talk about the design for the depopulation city regeneration in Johnstown.
Hello everyone, I am Muhammad Sulaiman, GSBS Postdoctoral Fellow in Institute of Disaster Mitigation for Urban Culture Heritage, Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto, Japan. Many thanks for the kind invitation to participate in the IGC 2021 to present our contribution Sustainable Geodesign of Alexandria Downtown in the framework of NSDS Egypt Vision 2030. Alexandria Downtown as a study area summarizes the problematic of authenticity and modernization, which is located North Egypt, overlooking the Mediterranean Sea from north and Lake Mareotis from south. So Alexandria is just a strip of land that had been chosen by Alexander the Great to build his new city in 332 BC. So cosmopolitanism, geopolitical location, and over than 2,300 years of cultural heritage diversity has formulated which is known now as Alexandria. The main problem of Alexandria is summarized in the anticipated growth rate, where now Alexandria is estimated, population is estimated as over than 5 million, while by 2030 it will exceed 6 millions. So extraordinary solutions should be considered to accommodate the population pressure. Consequently, the southern cultivated area is being corrupted due to random urban expansion as a result of the same causes. On the other hand, the deterioration of the outstanding value of Alexandria cultural heritage is mainly due to the illegal development and the multiple possession of cultural heritage property. Actually, Egypt has its own NSDS based on the world pillars and the goals to achieve sustainable development goals. Anyway, moreover should be made within the framework of NSDS in a holistic view, focusing on preserving the cultural heritage property, upgrading the urban mobility, and improving the environment of Alexandria. Accordingly, systems and targets had been designed utilizing Geodesign hub approach to achieve these three main goals. Let's have a look about Alexandria. Existing land use were constructed to understand the potential of the city itself. Concentrates are represented in the cultural heritage structure and geostrategic location of Alexandria is very limited, which is not hinder the efforts of development. According to the NSDS 2030, the two scenarios had been adopted into 2025 and 2030. The first scenario aims to achieve and implement a high demanded project until 2025, while the 2030 scenario is adopted to accomplish project had been started in 2025, added to developing other prioritized projects. The utilized methodology is DMUCH and Geodesign Hub had been collaborated to create these projects in collaboration with other agencies joined as participants such as NARIAGE, EJUST, TAFS, and Ministry of Antiquities and Tourism. So successive work over 3 months was spent due to data acquisition, processing, and analysis, eventually uploading on Geodesign Hub. In terms of sharing knowledge, Our team has participated with many affiliation and agencies to share knowledge and building capacity for young researchers and responsible using Geodesign Hub, such as Ritz-Mecca University, Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, High Institute of Tourism and Hotel Management, Kyoto City Archaeological Research Institute, EGIST, and so on. Actually, this work is acknowledged and funded resources to GSBS, that the main source of the fund, and we utilize it many softwares accommodated by Geodesign Hub, and provided many data for land use using land cover by it instructed and constructed by the MUCH team, and utilizing other source of data. Eventually, culture heritage were the core of negotiations, basically unconventional projects of tourism. Bike tracks and upgrading the historical tramway was highly demanded of all participants, while expanding the green infrastructure policy has been adopted to improve the environment and to accomplish the objectives of Geodesign Alexandria 2030. Finally, all these projects had been formulated and constructed by the DMUCH team, Muhammad Sulaiman, Tomiyoko Isami, Satoshi Imamura, under supervision of Yano Keiji Sensei, in collaboration with our friend Hirishikesh Bilal in Geodesign Hub. Alexandria Geodesign team work greatly acknowledged the Japan Society for Promotion of Science GSBS for supporting this contribution, which comes out within the first member at GSBS International Research Fellow. Thank you for attention.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation. I'm Zhihan Tao, a third-year PhD student in urban planning and regional science in Texas A&M University. So today, I'm talking about the project about how to design for the depopulating city, Regeneration in Johnstown. So we pick up Johnstown, like many other U.S. Rust Belt cities. It is a victim of the industrialization. At the collapse of the steel industry, Johnstown has faced severe problems related to population decline, including structural abandonment and economic downturn. You can see that in the development issue picture at the corner, at the right-hand corner. By using Johnstown as a case site, this project further developed a framework for design and planning for shrinking cities, integrating permanent functions into potential high development areas and more temporary functions into declining areas. So here are some assumptions and requirements for our project. We calculate that from the existing GIS data in the past 20 years. Project most of the innovations based around the green infrastructure. So we produce this project by the following steps. First, we identify the problem. We analyze local demographic information and GIS data, so we can identify the most urgent problem to the declining economy and flood-prone riverside area. Secondly, we use the GIS data to do the site analysis. We use multiple layers of GIS data, like the topography, contours, land use, land value, improvement value, etc., to do a comprehensive suitability map to find the most valuable spaces and the most hazardous areas for improvements. And then we come up with a design solution in a studio, so we can identify the specific issues on site, and we can find the solutions of the landscape design and the new green infrastructure renovation in this site. At last, we will use the tools IGC provided about the carbon calculation and also the landscape performance calculators provided by LAF to calculate the future performance in 2035 and 2050. The early adopter in 2035, the most of the changes happens around the riverside because the most attractive areas, and also there has a lot of abandoned structures and the vacant areas. We can utilize it as the newly recreational spaces and attractions to boost the local economy. So the community will have more green infrastructures and also more temporary or permanent commercial opportunities scattered in the community. So in the late adopter in 2050, we can see most of the design still remain on the previous phase of the renovating the existing vacant area and abandoned structure near the riverside. So the long-term benefits still need time to establish. So for the non-adopter, the declining trend will continue. So there will be no sustainable innovations happened in 2050. So we'll take a closer look at the different scenarios with different sustainable development goals by implementing our new designs. So in the early adopter, in 2050, the green infrastructure has already been implemented and well established. And also the commercial laws are implemented in the community because the government have more resources to do so. For the late adopter, you can see the focus still limited on the riverside landscape and structure renovation. And also the advocacy of the sustainable lifestyle is not yet promoted, and long-term environmental benefits are not yet established. So for the non-adopter, the declining trend continues. So when we look at the base numbers and per carbon captures, you can see in 2050, the newly implemented trees make a big difference in the carbon changes. In the late adopter scenario, you still have it has some benefits from the trees, but because the process has not been done, so the benefits is comparatively less to the early adopter scenario. For the non-adopter scenario, the trees are still facing the declining because of the aging issues, floods, and maintenance issue. How do we implement it? These innovations. Basically, we integrating existing housing by the innovative green infrastructure or commercial or temporary commercial and permanent commercial. The commercial is like in the right hand corner. This is how to integrate the housing and newly implemented designs. And for the local underutilized areas like the abandoned railway structure, you can see on the right up corner, there's the newly designed riverside landscape. There will be more parks for recreational uses and also market for commercial uses. And for the existing transportation structure, there will be more green infrastructure attached, like walkways, bioretention, and more native plants to reduce the vulnerability for floods. We can see there's a more comprehensive green infrastructure. There's more green infrastructure scattered in the residential areas, and also the abandoned railway structure and vacant space utilized. And also there will be more commercial uses to boost the local economy. And also what cannot be seen in this picture is the transportation structures are renovated with the green infrastructures. So here are our project participants and our supporting materials, mostly are references. So thank you.
So let's move on over chat box to see what questions we get. Oh, no questions? Okay, yeah, I see Carl raise hand. So please go ahead.
I have one question for the Alexandria problem and one question for the Johnstown problem. For the Alexandria problem, I would like to know who actually made the designs. You're a visiting scholar at Ritz-Macon. I know the university. I know the people there, and I know that we've been involved before. But is this you making the decisions, or you working with people in Alexandria making the decisions? I have no difficulty if it's an individual design problem. No problem, no difficulty at all. But I'd like to know, because you never said who's the author of the actual design. For the second project in Johnstown, I think that you are missing one major opportunity in the definition of the problem itself. Why are empty industrial buildings called industrial as opposed to a new category called open for reuse, period? So that we could see in the beginning a map of where the opportunities are to do something very, very different. Because you're left with a map that's purple, and I have no idea whether it's being used or not. I just don't know. Why didn't you create a new system called reusable, non-industrial, old industrial building? Maybe.
Yes, I think Hamid, you can
Yes,
answer first. Mhm.
Thanks, Professor Carl. Maybe you have met before sometimes, and maybe you know Alexandria is my hometown. So I and actually also I have graduated from Alexandria University, and I have started my career and continued my academic career in Alexandria with whether my master or my PhD. So I assume that I know Alexandria as back of my hand, you know. So, but anyway, we have developed this change model based on negotiation through 3 interactive workshops. Okay, that includes several affiliations and institutions, whether in Japan or Egypt, as we have explained in the video. Basically, we have regarding the Egyptian institutions who have joint affiliations, such as basically Ministry of Antiquities as the main stakeholder who are responsible for the culture heritage preservation. And of course, some of Alexandria municipality and other institutions, Egyptian institutions such as Nariaj, Aegis, or Narcissus. So, and
That's
after
very
that,
good.
okay.
That's, in fact, that's outstanding because it's a global, it's in effect using the technology that allows global collaboration. That's very, very good. You never said it. So I just was very curious what the actual role of individuals was in negotiating that design. Excellent. Very good.
Thanks so much.
Are you still in Japan now? Are you in Japan now?
In this moment, I am in Alexandria for a field trip, but I will fly back to Japan by 1st July.
Give KG my very best regards.
Yes.
Okay, Jihan, I think it's your turn to answer Carl's question.
Yeah, Carl, you make a very good point. But in our case, it's like the original, like purple squares, the original industrial uses, they actually like have the property owned by the stakeholders. So it's pretty hard to change its original use in our plan. So our plan is to like change the outside or the green infrastructure around the industrial sites.
Okay.
On the original side, you can see some vacant areas and some underutilized areas. They are actually abandoned railways and abandoned like industrial, like factories and unused areas. So that will be utilized as new commercial and new opportunities to implement
so
the new commercial.
You had the information on soft sites and look, if a site is occupied by an industry, you don't want to destroy people's jobs, especially in a declining city. I understand that, but it was not obvious. As a stranger to your data, that's all I can. As a stranger to it was not obvious what was there in the 2035 plan that allowed you to make a change to the 2050 plan. There was no graphic representation of why the changes were made. Okay,
I can kind of chime. Sorry, I can kind of chime in on that. This is Galen.
Galen, hi, Galen.
How you doing? Good to hear from you. So another reason why you saw a shift from purple to purple is that we worked with Cambria County. Do a lot of kind of community engagement. And basically, they had a lot of entrepreneurial and new tech industries coming in to replace the old steel industry buildings.
Okay.
So it did go from industry to industry, but it's a totally different industry. We probably didn't make that as clear as we should have in the presentation. Because the idea was that, right, so since the industries left, the people left, so they wanted to bring back kind of new, modern, cleaner industries to bring the people back. So they would become the anchor industries and the new kind of, I guess, economic engines that would spur these kind of smaller scale commercial and other developments and green infrastructure type things around them.
Yeah.
Great. So, Carol, did they answer your questions?
Yeah, they did. And
Okay.
and they answered it as I would expect them to do. But the crucial the crucial thing to me is, let me digress. My test is, do I understand what's going on? That's why I ask a question. And if I don't understand it, I don't consider it my problem. I consider it their problem, which is why I also ask a question. And those are the two questions I didn't understand. It's not that the answers were abnormal; they're expected, but they're also critical. How do you decide where to do something, and not knowing why you pick those places is part of a representation problem to me. So I tend to ask those kind of foolish questions, but the answers are absolutely appropriate answers.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So I see some questions in our chat box, and a question for Hamid, and he already answered that in our chat box, but I still, repeat the questions and let everybody know your oral answers. Like, can you expand a bit on cultural heritage related negotiations? Is there any pressures related to development, infill versus preserving the heritage? I think it's also similar questions that can be for Texas A&M Jihan's project. His project also mentioned about the cultural resources, and why not you two can jump out and discuss a little bit. So I think let's first take over to Hamid.
Okay, regarding the first question, of course, we can expand a bit of the cultural heritage related negotiations. Basically, our three interactive workshops, joined so many archaeologists or even architects who are interested in cultural heritage, including me as archaeologist, basically. And in this framework, we had negotiated the outstanding value of the city and the still existed cultural heritage property and also the archaeological assets, even including the submerged antiquities in the two harbors of on the eastern harbors of the city itself. So based on all this data, we have identified some criteria for evaluate the cultural heritage property of downtown Alexandria as a study area, and we have continued negotiation about it. And actually, this comes as the cultural heritage property of downtown Alexandria is the core of our project. While for the second part of the question, is there pressure related to development versus preserving the culture? Of course, I think this a headache problem everywhere. Usually, there is typical conflict between development and the preservation. We find, as archaeologists, we find this conflict everywhere, where even the municipality or the government wants to develop somewhere here or there to facilitate the and enhance the life of people. But what we discuss in our project here about Alexandria definitely is how to compromise the relation or harmonize this relation and convert it from the as a conflict to coexistence, if we can say. So, of course, Alexandria, this conflict, of course, exists in Alexandria, but we nowadays we get negotiation with Alexandria municipality or even the administration of antiquities in Alexandria, and also in Ministry of Antiquities itself, to compromise or to convince them to adopt such this approach. Is there other question? I think.
Yeah, I think there's also
In
Annibal's
Alexandria?
question.
Yeah,
Yes, about Alexandra, about your culture heritage. They ask, did you define a mitigation area around valuable historical or contemporary buildings? I think your
yes.
video mentioned about the protected zone, right?
Yes,
So,
exactly. Yes, exactly. I have mentioned that actually this is one of our main goals or targets in our Geodesign project for downtown Alexandria. Actually, Alexandria, as we have as you have watched in the video, has a cultural heritage diversity, and based on these facts, we identified a core zone to protect the city itself. Of course, there is we have two laws for protecting the cultural heritage. One for archaeological assets, and the other one for urban harmony. But we need, or we adopted in this proposed core zone to integrate the two laws and regulations to identify one core zone or unified core zone for the city itself to protect its cultural heritage from the point of holistic view.
Very good.
Okay.
okay, thank you. I think we can move to Jihan and talking about your project thinking about the culture. So please go ahead.
Yeah, the culture aspects of our project is pretty different from the Alexandria part because the city is seek to change because it cannot benefit from the former industry on site, and the industry become empty because the need for the market is not there anymore, so it's becoming shrinking at that time. So they are seeking for a change in the industry, both in the contents of the industry and the structure of the industry. So at this time, so as we mentioned before, the new IT technology companies taking over the factories and steel manufacturing industries. So by preserving the history of the city of the Johnstown, we can leave the existing railways and existing landscape in the new landscape, new infrastructure right there. We can still see that as a history, but to better development to reverse the declining trend of the city, we need to seek for more technological or green sustainable concepts for the city. Yeah, it's kind of opposite way than the historical city like Alexandria. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. You choose projects. Okay,
I'm sorry,
go.
I can
Yeah.
add a little bit to that, but yeah, I mean, it's just like Jihan said, most of the I would say structural integrity of the buildings that are abandoned there is pretty much dilapidated to the point where it's not all of them are rehabilitated or able to be rehabilitated. So a lot of the integrity, the historical integrity, may have to be kind of wiped out and rebuilt. But there are, we didn't tally up the kind of number of buildings that we adaptively reuse or those kinds of things, but we did try to adaptively reuse anything in a good condition as it was. And then also a lot of the green infrastructure we put in, obviously we promoted the kind of the native planting. So the ecological history is actually reinstituted as well. So we tried to salvage the kind of structural heritage elements where we could, and then reinvigorate kind of the ecological history as well as available.
Thank you. Thanks, Professor Newman. So yeah, definitely, I think, when I, watch your videos, two different projects, your two projects, the big difference is the scale. So one is the regional big scale, and the other is 400 meters by 400 meters local scale. Definitely the strategy, can be different. So, and in terms of your challenges in different places are different. So definitely, your strategies, the responded to it differently. So we also got one question from Professor Guoping Huang. He asked Hammett, he curious about the decision-making process in Alexandria, how you revise the proposal that might impact the current version 2030, which is really imminent. So, Hamlet, are you still here? It seems like, yeah, yeah, something happened. I think we can wait for a while and we can move to Jihan's project and we can come back later. Yeah, thanks for your patience, Professor Guoping Huang. So I want to ask, do you guys have any questions to Texas AM project? You can raise your hand and feel free to ask questions directly.
Alan's got his hand up.
Oh, we got him back.
No, Alan is raising his hand.
Yeah.
Okay, Alan, please go ahead.
Thanks. It is for Zihan and Galen, and it's there's a question in here somewhere, but it's mostly a couple of comments, which are more meta comments, and I'm making them since we always talk a little bit, but usually at the bar afterwards, about what we do well here in IGC, what we could do better, and also what we can't quite do well, at least not obviously. And so relative to your topic, a footnote for you, Leah Holstein did her dissertation with me a few years ago now, looking at shrinking cities. And she used Carl's framework not to make a design, but to talk to the various kinds of decision makers to structure their thoughts. And what emerged was some significant disconnects at a day-to-day operational level between the evaluations that were done, the kinds of change that could be envisioned, and the decision maker criteria. They just didn't line up. And so I think with all of our geodesign projects, there's the opportunity to poke a little bit more, not just with the representational schema, but at the fundamental questions about how the 6 models relate to each other. And I think that's one of the things that, again, when we usually have our own teams, our teams are always pretty friendly and looking for synthesis. But I think there's a chance with these real world projects to actually scratch deeper. The other thing is, that it's your topic especially, I think it's tough for us to do, and I'm wondering if you'd thought about this conundrum. It's often challenging on how to build a city in terms of getting the timing, the sequencing of things correct. Unwinding a city is even more difficult. When you start having to pull infrastructure offline, it has to be phased in certain kinds of ways, which you don't have to do if you're building. And that sends up a difference between the 25-year early adopter and the non-adopter, because you've got pain points. And I'm just wondering, were you able to contemplate the unwinding to rebuild component to this, which just doesn't fit our structure very well?
First, we look at the available resource we can use in the cities to see which parts are weakened parts and most influential areas. In this case, it's mostly scattered in the community and around the riverside, especially the abandoned railways. So we can start from there to build attractions, to add on new commercial or recreational uses for the community. So, and then we see how it works, how it brings more people, or how it benefits for the communities right here. And when we get more resources, we can do more to the community to renovate the existing structure, existing buildings and architects.
Let me state it more bluntly. You've actually got a shrinking population, and those people create demand for water and sewage. When they go away, your pressures don't work anymore. So you actually have to stage the decoupling for that. Those are the most obvious choices. or most obvious examples, but it happens with power systems too. And so I understand they're looking for the opportunities. I understand for one, get people in there, but you've got inertia not on your side before you can actually before you can redirect people to make the concentrations of activity that do make successful, sustainable places.
I'm a little, Alan, you're talking about the infrastructure.
Yeah.
I mean, so the infrastructure is already there, right? Because people used to live there.
Yeah, but again, this is like one of those complicated things because it is there, but it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And the more people leave, the less it does. And you get these marginal losses where it's no longer sustainable.
Yeah, I think, but our argument was, I mean, right? I mean, then you run into the flip side of the argument where if you're building outward, right, then you're having to put in all the brand new infrastructure, which is even less sustainable. So if you move people in, again, our difficulty in this is that, you know, it's an immense amount of decision making of the almost just series of different retrofits, because you have a site, but then you have this kind of land bank of vacancy and abandonment to work within that site, because there's always some good things that are happening too that you can't really disrupt. So yeah, no, that's an intriguing question. You know, we didn't really get into the semantics of, you know, the water pressure differences once we put the people back in, but that's an amazing thing to think about. I think our argument was more of it's much more sustainable to build in areas that already have infrastructure rather than continuing to spread out upon the landscape. But yeah, no, have you seen, actually, I hate to flip questions back to people, but have you seen instances where, like, I don't know, maybe in Pittsburgh or one of these former shrinking cities that have done a good job of reversing the trend?
Baltimore's one, which
Cleveland
has
is one.
and Cleveland,
Cleveland did a major studies of how to decline in the 70s and 80s.
Well, I mean, have you seen instances where he's saying the infrastructure failed once they kind of turned the trend around?
Baltimore.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and they had to, it was a very complicated set of unwindings, and they had a double problem there too, because it wasn't just plumbing, it was the way they built their houses.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'll have to look into that, because I know, Alan, I know you've written a lot on that, because I've cited some of your work when I wrote on it as well. So,
Anyway.
but yeah, I'll take a look into that.
We'll have our own little mini Texas conference.
Yeah, that sounds great, man.
Oh, Carl wants to know.
Yeah.
Galen, if this theme is going to continue as a part of your curriculum diversity, you know, you really ought to work with Penn State, which in the last meeting presented two projects of a similar kind. They happen to be in New York, but they have that as one of their major foci. And in that kind of a problem, what I've often wondered, and I thought about this with the Penn State projects last year, why isn't the 2035 plan really a reduction of the 2020 to make the opportunity between 2035 and 2050 to really bring it back up, as opposed to doing it piecemeal between 2020 and 2035? Why not just change people's houses, get bigger areas that you could develop, clean up the waterfront, which is a major area, and not let people continue bringing in new industry in the initial part, but making an opportunity for a major redevelopment. I can understand the sort of smaller investment opportunistic thing, but why not take a bigger strategic view of making opportunity? After all, the people are getting older, and maybe younger people don't want to be in the same places.
Exactly. Yeah, those are super valid points, and we dealt with, honestly, most of those points when engaging with the community. So long answer short, the engagement process, people don't want to see that their properties are going to be, you know, there's going to be an immense amount of vacancies around their properties longer than these other people's. So it's a juggling act of trying to, that's why we have it kind of spread out instead of, honestly, your framework probably works better in the long term, but you also have to deal with people's wills and fussing and
Oh,
those
sure,
types of things when you.
And
So
that's clear.
that's the reason why it's kind of more spread out than it is more kind of drastically. Here's, we clean it up, we put these few things in and allow it to spread out over time. A lot of people are scared, that some places they've had so much abandonment, they start turning off infrastructure, at least to their suburbs and stuff, that may have actually, depopulated to the point where anyone that's left is forced to move out. They may not even get water anymore. And they've heard these kind of war stories, and you don't want them to think they're falling victim to those things. So it can be tricky. It's a tricky thing to kind of tightrope. So, but I mean, I totally agree with you. It makes much more sense to take that approach.
Thank you for discussing our very interesting topics about the depopulation stats. So since Hammett comes back, so we still see one question for you when you disappeared. So a questions come from Professor Guoping Huang, as you can see in your chat box. He curious about the decision-making process in Alexandria, how you revised the proposal, and that might impact the current version 2030, which is really imminent.
So let me explain the question a bit, because I know that in Egypt, the decision-making process is often top-down. For example, I know that the Vision Egypt 2030 was initiated by the president LCC, and just like the former president, they always launch new big initiatives. I'm just curious, in your case, that you do have a kind of stakeholder engagement process, and you have a negotiated vision, and how this kind of approach might impact this kind of top-down decision-making process.
Okay. Regarding to that, I think it's your question. Sorry for interruption in internet, and sorry I just hear you difficult. But let me answer what I understand from your question. Our Geodesign project is we suppose it is a realistic project because we are. As I have mentioned before, the core of our project is cultural heritage, but we seek to develop the cultural heritage of Alexandria downtown and involve it in the NSDS 2030 of Egypt, in the outline of the vision of the Egyptian government and the big initiatives of President Sisi, as I have mentioned now. And actually, it's not a sort of dream or something like that. But I think it is so realistic because we put one of our targets is to how to walk in a line with the vision of the government itself. Nowadays, as I have mentioned, we get negotiation with the Ministry of Antiquities of Egypt and the local authority of antiquities in Alexandria, and also National Organization for Urban Harmony and other related stakeholders to negotiate more.
Very good.
I think Hammer phrased right. So I think he did answer the questions, and we do have a few seconds remain in our session. So thank you so much for your all great discussion. So I really enjoyed. So we can get back to the main session and enjoy the rest of the IGC 2021. Thank you all.